Hello and welcome to the Women's Eye podcast. I'm Stacey Gualandi. On the Women's Eye, you'll meet intriguing women who are taking charge and making a difference, like my guest today. Paola Gianturco is the best-selling and award-winning author and photographer who has documented through 5 books inspiring stories of women and girls from across the globe who are literally changing the future. Well, coming soon is her 6th book, written with her granddaughter, Avery, Cool: Women Leaders Reversing Global Warming. It is the first book to chronicle the work of female climate leaders globally and will show us the way to a livable planet. Well, welcome back to the Women's Eye, Paola. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's been great because over the last few years, I mean, you're great. You put out books just at the right amount of time, but I mean, we had Grandmother Power, we had Wonder Girls. I mean, so you really, if there are fascinating women out there in the world, you're capturing them and putting them in books. But now you've tackled such an easy topic. I mean, this was an undertaking, was it not?
This was, but it's an existential topic. I mean, I can't tell you how impassioned I am about documenting what's happening with women around the world.
No, with this book too, with Cool, I love this, Women Leaders Reversing Global Warming. This particular book, this came out of your own passion about global warming and climate change, correct?
Yes. And also it came out of my impatience because so much of the coverage, the news coverage about climate change engages and reports on what men are doing. Al Gore, Bill McKibben, Bill Gates, Paul Hawken. I mean, they're doing incredibly important work, but you can't help but think, what are women doing? As usual, why am I not surprised? Women's stories are just not being told. So my granddaughter, who is my co-author of this book, she was 12 at the time, she and I decided that we would document women's stories, which really hadn't been done all over the world.
Why is that, do you think, though? Because there are so many women, and you've just probably touched on just I think 27, and which is probably a small part of a huge, group of women who are doing great work. But why is that, though, do you think, that women aren't being spotlighted?
I think women are almost never spotlighted until there are a few who somehow surface and gain press attention. But too often, the women who are making real contributions simply aren't ever reported. So we took that on.
I should mention too, obviously, this was a 4 years in the making. The pandemic, I imagine, had quite a, or maybe did it not? How did it affect putting this book together over the last couple of years?
Actually, we had only one interview left to do when everything closed down and we had to stop traveling. And that was interviewing an Inuit woman in the Arctic. So we interviewed her by phone, and she provided us the photographs that are used in her chapter, but we got to see everyone else in person.
Before we get into the real nitty gritty, how much research was involved? Because you profile so many fascinating women, but there had to have been a lot of work leading up to and actually then going to these women in countries all over the globe.
It took a huge amount of paper and computer research, almost a year before we began traveling. And then Avery and I started and we went all over the United States. I think there were 8 interviews in the US. And then I went on. And so there are 10 countries involved in this book.
Wow.
US, Canada, UK, Sweden, Denmark, Australia, Sri Lanka, India, and Hong Kong.
Oh my God. Yes, and you've offset all of those miles too, didn't you?
Actually, you bet we did. We made a contribution to the earthday.org canopy project. They're planting trees all over the world. They have the goal of planting a tree for every person on the planet.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it. Trees are my favorite. Like I get so mad if a tree gets cut down or has to be trimmed or something in our backyard because oh, they're like my friends, you know, but you know, working, what's interesting is probably a lot of inspiration for this book too, not only your own interest, but your granddaughter. She had a big influence on the making of this book too, correct?
For sure.
Yeah.
She
How old is she now?
She is now, when the book comes out, she'll be 14 and a half, almost 15.
Gotcha.
She lived in Los Angeles, and so she had seen the terrible wildfires that had twice, 2 years in a row, swept down, up and down the 405 freeway. In fact, a family who was evacuated came and stayed with her family. So she was very aware of the effects of climate change. And very disturbed about them. She began thinking immediately what she could do. And the first thing she did was go to her school and ask them to substitute bamboo utensils for the lunch plastic utensils. And then she organized her 6th grade classmates to do a website. And they wrote articles for the website, and they posted all kinds of crafts, things you could make with recycled materials. And then she sort of settled back, and she and I were talking, and she said, what can I do next? And so we were talking about the fact that women's stories, climate leaders' stories, are really not visible. And we thought we would try to change that.
Absolutely. I think that's so amazing though, at such a young age, that she's that perceptive and that also very concerned about her own future, you know, and what are the adults doing, right? But she's a girl beyond her years, would you say? And your other granddaughter too, who helped you on a previous book too.
It's true. Her older sister, Alex, was my co-author on Wonder Girls, which was about activist girls ages 10 to 18. Don't underestimate them.
I know. It's like, thank goodness for, you know, for the two of you for sure, but just that hopefully what she's doing, obviously, and we'll talk about that too, what the intent is here. But now in the why of starting this book, did you feel that this was going to be a daunting task? Did you, what was it about in the thinking of making this book for you?
I didn't think it was going to be as daunting as it turned out to be. Women are active all over the world in so many ways that it was actually very hard to trim them back to a book-sized list. I thought about women. I wanted them all to be not only geographically diverse, but also ethnically and racially diverse. And I wanted them to be working for governments and for businesses and for nonprofits and for arts organizations. And I wanted them to be working on completely different kinds of solutions. So in the book, you'll find women who are designing bicycle superhighways, and you'll find women who are working on food waste. You'll find women who are planting mangrove trees, because mangrove trees absorb 5 times the carbon emissions that regular tropical trees do. So there's a great diversity and balance in the book.
And I like too how you broke it down to inventing and reducing emissions, and there were strict, you know, guidelines as to who qualified for each section, but also following, you know, a global. I think, what is it? You drew from a book that was basically the policy of what the world should do. I'm totally blanking on the name, but
the name is Drawdown.
The Drawdown. Thank you.
Edited by Paul Hawken and about 200 scientists around the world, and they identified 80 different actions that we could take if we really intended to draw down carbon emissions. So the qualifying factor for the stories in the book had to do with whether or not they were on that list. They were doing work that was on that list. So all of these women are really making a huge difference.
Yes. Why? Well, in all of your research, and there's research out there to support your research and vice versa, but are women more effective at making positive changes regarding the climate?
I didn't know that when I began the book. Very recently, and in the course of our doing these interviews, research began coming out from, for example, Christiana Figueres, who was the midwife of the Paris Agreement, and also from Foreign Policy magazine. And they revealed that new research is showing that women in very high executive positions, for example, on boards, maybe CEOs, those women are very likely to take climate and the environment into consideration when they're making all kinds of decisions. And the effect of that is that their organizations are, in fact, making a real difference in terms of positive environmental change.
So, trying to analyze this, why is that, do you think? It's like, so we just need to put women in charge of everywhere, right, in order to get this done.
Good idea.
Yeah. But yeah, it's so funny because that seems to be what you certainly have laid out in the book too. But I'm just wondering why that is. I don't know.
Well, it wasn't happenstantial. It wasn't just happenstantial. I mean, what we discovered is that all of these women had very concrete action plans relative to climate change. Mm-hmm. So they really intended to make a difference in this area, and they have.
So what's your dream now that the book is completed and it's coming out soon, but it is available, many aspects of it too, for people to access. But what is it about COOL that you hope will have in terms of accomplishing? What do you think it will do once it's out there for all of humanity to take in?
My great hope is that it will demystify climate change and that it will encourage readers to take action. Too little action is taking place. And that's a bit surprising because by now, most people are very aware of the effects of climate change. All of us have seen the wildfires, we've seen terrible floodings, we've seen awful hurricanes and storms that otherwise would not be taking place. But for some reason, still, people tend to veer away from taking action. And some of the reasons, the barriers to action, are things like people just think it's too scientific and complicated to understand. Or maybe they think it's too political to talk about. Yeah. Or maybe they think it's too big for one person to have an effect. And that couldn't be more wrong, because if each of us does what each of us can do, and we all do it together, then we can reach a kind of critical mass that can, in fact, cause huge change.
Yes, that's, I think, in your conversations with people and during the making of this book and the writing of the book and now, is that what you're feeling? People are like, oh, I can't make a difference, or it's too daunting, too overwhelming. What do you think?
And also, they just don't know what to do. And it isn't too hard to figure that out. But in fact, COOL is different from other books about climate in that it has all kinds of ideas about what kinds of action people can take. I'll talk about that if you want me to for a little bit.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
One thing we did was invite the women leaders in the book each to give us a flat action object. We were thinking about maybe decals or stencils or something that we could put in between the pages of the book.
Oh, yeah.
And so, for example, the Climate Museum in New York gave us credit card size guide to discussing climate. And people have such trouble talking about climate. That's a wonderful bit of information. Mm-hmm. We also, yes, exactly. We also invited the women leaders each to give 3 to 6 different ideas about what readers could do. And every chapter ends with those ideas. And each of those sets of ideas is marked by a QR code.
Mm-hmm.
If readers take out their smartphones and
Yep. You can just go right.
exactly, check out the QR code, they will fly to the project website, and they will then get details about how they can take action on those ideas.
It's fantastic. It's great because it's instantaneous. I mean, you can get right to it.
Exactly.
But and what's great is these 27 women are so unique and fascinating, each in their own right. My favorite, I think, was I don't know how to pronounce her name, but from Denmark, the Lego exec, who's literally creating a whole new type of plastic for Legos, which I love that because I was a Lego kid. But yeah, is there of the 27, is there one that's kind of stands out, or one that you would really like to focus in and talk about today?
Oh, I'd love to talk about the Lord Mayor of Sydney. First of all, did you know that women could be Lord Mayors?
No.
Me too.
I was like, that's a really cool title.
I know. So she is the first woman ever to be elected Lord Mayor of Sydney. And she has been serving longer than any other Lord Mayor in the entire history of the city. She was elected in 2004. And she did a huge survey to see what were the priorities of her constituents, and discovered that 97% of them wanted action on climate change. 97%. So one of the first things she did was say that by 2030, the government would have cut the carbon emissions by 70%.
Wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
In a short period of time.
Well, she started in 2000. This was by now 2008. And so she was aiming at 2030.
Yeah.
Here's what she did.
Yeah.
She planted 13,000 trees, which of course take emissions out of the air. She put in bike lanes, of which there were none, so that people could get out of their cars, which produce emissions, and begin riding their bikes. She switched out all of the bulbs in the street lights to LEDs.
That's great.
Exactly. So she cut down the amount of energy that they required. She encouraged them to use public transportation and built more public transportation. So she had an entire plan that was quite coherent. And here's what happened. In 2011, her city was named the first carbon neutral city in all of Australia.
That's amazing.
It's particularly amazing because she is at odds politically with the Prime Minister of Australia, who very proudly brags that they have the largest coal mine in the world in their country. So think about the difference. This happened by 2011, and she had set a time frame all the way to 2030.
Yeah.
And so now she is updating her goals. Sydney is a member of an organization called C40 Cities. They're all the mayors who share ideas about what works and what doesn't work. And so in addition to everything else, she's now helping educate other mayors all over the world.
So this is Clover Moore is a name to remember, because she sets, she set an example, and she's still the Lord Mayor. And I would imagine, because it's not like, I can't imagine it was like very easy, but she did it and did it quickly, or way in advance of the actual deadline. So I could see many taking her lead. Do you feel that people will?
I think so. And she's particularly passionate about it because she has worried about the environment, thought about the environment, literally her whole life. I loved two stories that she told me when I was interviewing her. First of all, we had to climb out on the balcony outside of her office to photograph her because she wanted to have the trees behind her. When she was a child, she told me, she gave trees to her parents as birthday presents.
Wow.
And the other thing she told me was that when she was a child, she started a kids club. Here's the title of the kids club: was called Scarlet Pimpernels of Neptune.
She was so ahead of her time.
The Scarlet Pimpernels of Neptune. And she took these classmates off on walks through the national park. So this woman has been thinking about the environment her whole life.
It's fascinating. You know, it's funny because she had a plan. So it's a climate action plan. How important are those, and what exactly are those? I mean, literally just a list of these are the goals.
Exactly. So when you think about the work she did, it involved trees and light bulbs and so forth. The whole list is quite diverse. And what we discovered as we were interviewing these women is that all of them had an action plan like that, very consciously decided and very carefully executed. And it was that, in part, that was responsible for their effectiveness. And so Avery and I were increasingly convinced that each of us could have a climate action plan for ourselves and for our families. And that, in fact, with just a little bit of thinking, we could begin to have a greater effect than we are currently having.
That's great. Yeah, because obviously the book, you hope, will inspire people to create their own plans. I mean, what are some ways that I could do? I mean, because I'm pretty good. I've got LED bulbs, and, you know, I try to recycle, and I try to think of some of the things, planting trees. We're doing a whole big landscaping thing. So what are some other ways that I and people like myself, you know, could help in terms of offsetting some of these climate problems?
Well, think about your car. How often do you
Hybrid.
use it? How often do you use it? How often do you have to use it? Could you walk? Could you ride a bike instead?
Mm-hmm.
Depends on where you live. That might or might not work. Next time you buy a car, maybe it will be a hybrid or an electric car if you don't have one. So
I did walk to my facial last week, so that's good.
that is good.
So it's pretty close, but you know, what is ultimately the core climate problem that these climate action plans addresses?
Well,
what's the problem? What
right,
are we trying to get
really
rid of here?
Want to zero in on it. The problem is that we are burning more coal and oil and gas than can be absorbed. It used to be possible to absorb it all, but now we have added so much more carbon dioxide emissions that it cannot easily yet be absorbed. So there are two ways to turn that around. One is to stop putting carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere, and one is to take them out of the atmosphere. So I didn't talk yet about what you can do in that area. You could do what you're doing is great, planting trees or bushes or flowers or plants or grass. All of those take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
And you and Avery obviously will be an example to us. Ultimately, what was it like working with your granddaughter on this book?
Well, it was terrific. Everybody you know should hang out with an 11 or a 12-year-old for a while. I mean, everybody says to me, oh, she's so lucky. She will learn so much from you. I learned so much from her. It was an astonishment.
What was there one thing that sticks out that she taught you or that you learned?
Here, I'll tell you something that, because this is what you do as well as what I do. We were going into our first interview, and we had finished our first interview, and I always have like 50 questions, things that I want to ask. And I always start on fairly neutral ground. So very factual at the beginning. And it's only after lots of questions that I say, now tell me how you met your husband. Because people don't want to tell you that at first.
Right.
And Avery said, grandmother, I think we should put the 6 most important questions at the top. And then I'll be the timekeeper, and if she talks more than 10 minutes, we'll go on to the next question. And so at the end of 1 hour, we will have answers to the 6 most important questions. And if she talks faster, we can ask the other questions. She was so right. I sealed my lips because I wanted to say, that won't work.
But it
But
did. It worked out nice.
of course, these were all women executives. They could give us 1 hour and they were out.
That's
So if we could tailor our questions to the amount of time we were about to get, we wouldn't get the answers we needed. She was
oh.
absolutely right.
Oh, that's great. I mean, just again, she's going to be such an example. And in this book, when can we access the book and the actual physical book? And then right now we can actually see a lot of what you've put in the book too, right?
2 questions. The book will be released on Earth Day 2022, April 22, 2022.
Very appropriate.
Very nice. It will be available in bookstores and on Amazon. And in fact, Amazon is taking pre-orders right now.
That's great.
You can see some parts of the book on the project website, which is cool, reversingglobalwarming.com. If you go to the ACT page of the site, you will see a list of all of the women in the book. And if you click on their names, you will get their ideas about what action you can take. In addition to the how to do them points that Avery and I have added. So there's lots that you can access now.
There's so much work there. I mean, thank you so much for compiling all of this, because you did the heavy lifting. You did the hard part. Now we can just go in and it's making it so accessible to people. And ultimately, I guess that's the ultimate goal, right?
I hope so.
That's fantastic. Well, it's a very cool book. I love it.
Thank you.
So I got to see and go through it too. So, well, Paola, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out to educate us all, because it's like, I believe your daughter or granddaughter said that it's the future and our lives depend on it. Correct?
It's the future and our lives depend on it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, thank you so much. And to learn more about Paola Gianturco and her cool book, just go to our website, thewomenseye.com. And there you can also find our books, 20 Women Storytellers. And Paola is in another book of ours called 20 Women Changemakers. Thanks again for that, Paola.
You bet.
Well, thanks. Well, thanks for tuning into the Women's Eye podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. I'm Stacey Gualandi. Remember, it's the world as we see it.